What do Mario, Luigi, Billy Lee, and Chun-Li all have in common? Unfortunately, this. It took until 2018 to start to crack the formula for making a video game movie that an audience might actually like. But the question still remains, how did they do it? Fortunately, we have one of the directors who did it here with us.
Hey, I'm Allan Ungar. I'm the writer and director of the Uncharted Fan Film with Nathan Fillion.
So, today on Screen Rant Docs, we answer the question, how do you make a video game movie work? And more importantly, how do you make gamers like it? It was a long-held belief that video games simply couldn't be adapted into major motion pictures. From the outset of the first video game movie, Super Mario Bros., there was no clear vision for how someone should adapt it into an appealing film. And there were signs that spelled doom from the very beginning. The Super Mario Bros. Project began as an independent film, and studios rejected the script because they thought it was too dark. That threw the production into a complete panic, and instead of sticking with the original script, they threw it out and told director Rocky Morton to work with a new writer. The new writer wrote the new script in the span of a week and a half, and only a week before the start of principal photography. The script was apparently so different that Morton and his co-director Annabelle Jankel considered walking off the film. This was tragically only the beginning of the problems that would plague the production team. The team had 5 units working daily with an enormous set, but no money to actually light it. Morton reminisced that he once requested a crane to put a camera on, but couldn't afford a crane for a movie that size. And if production troubles weren't enough, the post-production proved just as troubling. Morton is quoted as saying, "We tried to edit it together at the end to make more sense of the mess, and we were locked out of the edit room. We had to get the Directors Guild of America to open the edit room for us." All of these factors, studio meddling, last-minute script revisions, and being prevented from actually editing the film, led to the first in a long line of video game adaptations that left audiences wondering what the studios were thinking and seemed to spell doom for the genre. That is, until the release of 1995's cult classic and the beginning of Paul W.S. Anderson's career adapting video games to film, Mortal Kombat. While still by no means a critical darling, Mortal Kombat did remarkably well at the box office, but it wasn't without its obstacles. Speaking to Hollywood Reporter in 2015, producer Larry Kasanoff told the story of his trials getting the rights to the film. He recalls saying to Neil Nicastro, "If you give me the rights to this, I promise you I will produce this, not just in movies, but in every medium in the world." Nicastro looked at him and said, "You're full of crap. It's just an arcade game." That began a 3-month process of Larry Kasanoff trying to convince them that it was more than just an arcade game. They didn't believe it. Larry Kasanoff was quoted saying, "Because video game movies had recently failed like Mario Bros., no one believed it. Even in 1995, Super Mario Bros. Already had a reputation that said video game movies weren't viable." However, Kasanoff eventually succeeded in getting the movie greenlit. In many ways, the production of Mortal Kombat was the polar opposite of Super Mario Bros. Where the Super Mario Bros. Cast and crew were stressed and disheartened by the project, the cast and crew of Mortal Kombat were enthusiastic and committed to making a great film. And while Super Mario Bros.' biggest star was Dennis Hopper, a man who lived up to his reputation as someone who's very difficult to work with, Mortal Kombat's biggest star was Christopher Lambert, who set a very different standard for how actors should behave. Mortal Kombat had a 3-week stint at #1, grossed $70 million domestically, and earned an estimated $122 million worldwide. The approach Kasanoff and Anderson took to creating this film was instrumental in making all of the pieces come together. Commenting on the making of the film, Kasanoff said, "I never thought we were making a movie based on the video game. I always thought what we had to do was imply that the video game is the first incarnation of some story that exists. It doesn't contradict the video game, it adds to it." And this was the approach that Paul Anderson took throughout his career. While his Resident Evil films were by no means critical darlings either, the franchise was a remarkable success and to date, the only successful video game to movie franchise with more than one sequel. And incidentally, director Allan Ungar used this approach when making his viral fan movie. On July 16, 2018, writer-director Allan Ungar released his Uncharted Fan Film to YouTube, which starred Nathan Fillion as Nathan Drake, a popular fan casting since the series began. And Fillion lived up to fans' expectations.
It really came down to getting Nathan. If I couldn't get Nathan, there was no point. to doing this thing. So it really sort of was about that at the end of the day and trying to pull that off. I remember saying to myself that if I can't get him to do this, I'm not going to do it, period. As much as I want to, I'm not going to, because I don't think it would be as exciting to people. I think ultimately the reason that it exploded and it was exciting was because it was this internet joke. It was this wish list of the fans, whether it be in Reddit lore or social media in general or in pop culture. It just became this thing that people talked about. Hey, could you imagine if? And no one ever actually does it, right? Like no one actually ever goes and does the thing that the fans are telling you to do or saying they wish they could see. So honestly, it was really trusting my knowledge and familiarity with that character, knowing that character inside and out, and knowing that I understand games in a certain way as a gamer from that perspective. I think that was the most important thing.
The Uncharted film was an original work, set in the same universe as the Uncharted games, but stayed true to the characters and world the games had set up. And perhaps what is most remarkable is this film was not made on a high budget, and the cast and crew actually donated a lot of their time.
All of them went above and beyond, whether it was the overtime, prep days, everything. And, I think a lot of them got even more excited when they found out what it was we were doing, because remember, not everybody knew what we were making, right? At first, it was, the cinematographer and the producers were the only ones. And even though the wardrobe and the makeup artists, and there were some people who were like, I need a little bit more to go on here, and then you start hinting and they were all geeks like us, which was awesome. And they were like, oh, I think we know what we're making here. And luckily, Nathan was always Nathan Drake. Nathan always wanted to be Nathan Drake. And so he knew exactly what this was going to be for him. And he was just such a great driving factor here. He was the most warm, kind, intelligent, collaborator. But even Stephen Lang, luckily I had worked with him before. We were friends. I know his son, and we had a really great time doing my Netflix movie Gridlocked, and he was really excited to work with me again.
And this seems to be a common theme that was found in Mortal Kombat's development as well. A cast and crew with a passion for the work coming together to create something for the fans and themselves. However, the Uncharted fan film led to a very important question about adaptation. Is it better to create an original work with only the rules of the video game's universe intact, or to create a perfect adaptation directly lifting from the source material? This wasn't really a question in the 90s when the film started being made, as the video game worlds weren't really fleshed out at the time. Mario jumped on turtles, Billy Lee beat up endless thugs, and Mortal Kombat gained a reputation for hyperviolence. Trying to translate something so thin in story from an interactive medium to a visual medium where story is critical would be difficult for even the most creative filmmaker. Some even tried to recreate the video game perspective perfectly, like the 2005 adaptation of Doom. The problem is, this doesn't quite capture the feeling of playing Doom. At least no more than it does every other first-person shooter. There's nothing specifically Doom about this. Whereas when the Uncharted film recreates the camera angles and gameplay from the Uncharted video games, it does so with all the character and little nuances that made it stand out in the game.
When it comes to adapting these sort of properties, there's a difference between video game movies and video game content. And what I like to say is that we've often seen video game movies. We don't see as much video game content when it comes to these adaptations, because things like the third-person tracking shot, the Doom first-person shot, they're gimmicks that sometimes don't work in film, in movies, right? But if you're creating something for a certain genre, you can get away with it, right? So it was interesting that you touched on that, but I think first I was super lucky. My stunt coordinator, Joe Perez, was an old friend, super talented guy, amazing vision. And ultimately what happened was we had written this really big sequence after he jumps out of the window. Originally he was supposed to slide down the roof going, no, like from the games, and he would hang off the roof. You'd have a signature, Uncharted moment where he can maybe do some leaping and jumping. And I remember thinking to myself, there is no way this is ever going to happen. It's never going to happen. How are we going to condense this and make it something? Because the scale and scope of these action sequences in these AAA games, they're huge. You've got explosions, you've got trains crashing, you've got people hanging off of cliffs, running from tanks. how are you going to do that in a short film that's basically no money? I remember speaking to my co-writer Jesse about this, and he was saying we should try to just condense the shot list. And then it hit me. I said, what if we just did a oneer? What if we just tried to recreate what it's like to go from cutscene to gameplay? Nobody's ever done that before. And he was like, that's not what I meant. That's not what I was saying. You're talking crazy now. And I pitched it to Joe, and Joe said, let's break the internet. Let's do it. I would say in the fight sequences, it was really important to capture Nathan's fighting style, which was very much not polished, but he's a scrapper, he's a brawler, he's a survivor, right? There's no specific flair to the way he does it. He just does it his own way. And so incorporating all of those beats and all those moves ended up being really pivotal from day one. And so, yeah, I can't sort of commend the stunt guys enough for sort of putting in the time, having fun, wanting to get it right, understanding how important it was going to be to the community and the audience to see Nathan Drake in action, in live action, right?
And their work paid off. They got something that Hollywood game adaptations were missing. And simply put, that's the heart of these games and characters. And that is something that Hollywood never did get quite right. That is until 2019. When Nintendo and Sega stepped back into the live-action film world with the biggest franchises in their arsenals. Detective Pikachu was not what anyone was expecting from a live-action Pokémon movie, but nonetheless, it ended up becoming the most successful video game movie domestically, a title it would hold for less than a year when Sonic the Hedgehog, after controversy and a big delay, managed to overtake that record. And these two movies are an interesting case study in adaptations, because while they both succeed in maintaining the heart of their respective video games, when it comes to adapting the story, they take very different approaches to get there. Detective Pikachu's story was derived from the 3DS game of the same name, with many similar elements taken from the plot. Of course, the film takes some creative liberties with these. For instance, the Pikachu wasn't voiced by Ryan Reynolds in the game, but Ryan Reynolds' presence definitely brings some life to the character. But what is important to note is that while the movie can be seen as a close adaptation of the game's material, it remains true to the well-established Pokémon universe. This is in contrast to Sonic the Hedgehog, a character who, in this film, exists in a universe similar to our own. The creative liberties taken with Sonic the Hedgehog are quite large, with Jim Carrey playing a very Jim Carrey-esque Dr. Robotnik, no Sonic friends, at least until the very end, and really very few of the video game elements. No Chaos Emeralds, no changing animals into robots, and Sonic's rings are actually used for an entirely different purpose. It's entirely an original story borrowing very little from Sonic's storylines. And yet, it's the reigning domestic champion. And this is after the film gained a lot of negative press regarding Sonic's initial character design. And speaking of character, it would appear that has a lot to do with getting a video game film right. Sonic is known for his trademark cool attitude, his fun-loving personality, and most important of all, his speed. And there is no question that the film managed to nail these aspects of the character. And casting Ben Schwartz as Sonic likely had a lot to do with it. In an interview on NPR, Ben Schwartz commented on the original fan reaction to Sonic's design.
The biggest thing we got out of that was that there's a lot of people that really care. And so I think they saw that they needed to make some adjustments. And I'm very happy they did because I love the way he looks now. I think the way he looks now is the way in my head when I was voicing him, that's what I thought was going to happen.
Jeffrey Fowler, the director, had a similar take. Taking to Twitter, he stated, "Thank you for the support and the criticism. The message is loud and clear. You aren't happy with the design, and you want changes. It's going to happen. Everyone at Paramount and Sega are fully committed to making this character the best he can be." This reception to criticism reflects well on the commitment the filmmakers had to making something for the fans, to getting this character right. Because the fans made it clear that if the character doesn't look or feel right, they will make it known. But looking at all these adaptations, Super Mario Bros., Mortal Kombat, Uncharted, Detective Pikachu, and Sonic the Hedgehog, we can draw some conclusions about how adaptation can be done successfully. You need two things specifically. Number one, a supportive cast and crew, willing to work together and give everything they have to make the best product possible. And two, a full understanding and accurate representation of the characters they're adapting. Without these, whether you're adapting a story directly from the source material or making something completely unique, your story will fall flat. And no filmmaker wants that.
You have to look at the property. You have to look at the trajectory of where it's gone, where the character is, where the world is, and ultimately decide what is best for that property. Because there are going to be games, there are going to be characters that, deserve a little bit more interpretation. They deserve a little bit more, as you want to call it, something additive to that. Now, I think you could argue that maybe some of the misfires in the past were a result of deviating too far from what made the games work. I think that there is a very compelling argument to make there. But I would also say that there is a fine line, there is a balance in what that right approach is, and it's all IP dependent.
It isn't easy to adapt such a unique medium like video games. We spend hours with these characters, even the ones like Mortal Kombat, who, at the time, didn't have much of a story to begin with. So when we see these characters in film, we know beyond any shadow of a doubt whether that's the character we've come to know and love or a pale imitation. So if you're going to adapt these games, the most important aspect is that those characters are accurate and that the rules of that universe are followed. There's plenty of room for creativity. Just don't change what people already love. After all, they're here for a reason.
The purpose was to give something to the fans. It was to prove that you can do this sort of content right if you understand the balance between pleasing the fans, the community, and bringing in a new audience, bringing in a wider demographic. And whether they were just fans of Nathan or fans of the game, I think we proved that you could do it. And ultimately, this has served as a market test for something much larger that we're doing with other gaming IP on a much larger scale that I'm super excited about. And it wouldn't have been possible without doing Uncharted.
Thank you for watching. I'd like to at this time once again thank Allan Ungar for his awesome interview and letting us talk to him about video game movies. And remember, be sure to subscribe to Screen Rant for the next great video. Have a good one.